So today we are going to discuss a very important topic in neuroanatomy and physiology, that is cerebellum. Okay, we are going to talk about cerebellum. Now, if I want to talk about cerebellum, then I will at first start with three basic questions. Question number 1 to you is, why don't we bump into each other in a busy road? Do you know the answer? How can we control ourselves in that manner so that we don't bump into each other? You know the answer? Okay. My next question is, what is the difference between you and Lionel Messi? You know that? What is the basic difference? Don't say that you don't know how to play football. We all have legs, right? And we all know how to kick a ball. Not that. Okay. Now, and the third most important question right now is this, that if I ask you right now, those of you who are right now watching this video, you must also do this exercise. If I right now tell you to move your head to right side with your eyes closed, can you do that? Obviously yes, right? I hope you are not challenged with respect to your cerebellum. Okay, that means when you are trying to answer these three questions, one thing will be common, and that is the cerebellum. Okay, so today our discussion topic is cerebellum. Now, a very important point we need to understand is this: why cerebellum is important. There are many things related to cognitive ability and all these things. Okay, but primarily cerebellum is actually involved in mainly three things. Okay, cerebellum is actually involved in mainly three things. Number one is, if we try to write it, now listen with all your attention. Okay, listen. Number one is, so my first question was, why don't we bump into each other? Then the answer is, cerebellum knows position of body parts, position of our body parts in three-dimensional space. Okay, now listen with all your attention. Suppose if I tell you to uplift your right hand, then you will be like this, right? If I tell you to uplift your left hand, it will be like this. Now listen with all your attention. How you know that to uplift means not this, right? In a class you do this, but if I right now tell you, you will be like this. Suppose I tell you, raise your hands who wants to attend this lecture, you will be like this, right? Now if I tell you that I will be beating you with a scale, raise your hand, then you will be doing like this, right? Then how do you know what to do when? Now listen, it's your cerebrum which actually decides that, but cerebrum actually tells your cerebellum that in 3D space, when that person is trying to hit you, you should do like this because he is your teacher. Clear? Now, whenever cerebrum responds that, okay, he is asking a question and I should respond by doing like this, that means it is a class. So cerebrum has already decided that you are in a classroom environment. Clear? So cerebrum actually controls in most of the case cerebrum controls cerebellum, no doubt about this, but now listen with all your attention. Cerebellum also does many things, that is, it controls position of our body parts in 3D space. Now listen with all your attention. This control of cerebellum of our body parts in a 3D space, the fourth dimension, 3D means 3 dimension. What is the fourth dimension? Time. Okay, we'll talk about that later in our relativity theories, okay, and relativity classes. Now listen, position of our body parts in 3D space have a special name which is called proprioception. Okay, which is called proprioception. Okay, position of our body parts in 3D space is known by the name of proprioception or proprioception, whatever it is. Okay. Now, so why don't we bump into each other? Because we have the control that where our body is going in 3D space, right? That is, due to cerebellum, our proprioception is okay. That's why we are not going into, we are not bumping into each other, right? Now listen with all your attention. This was the answer to our question number 1. Okay. This was the answer to our question number 1. Okay. Now, what was our question? What is the difference between you and Messi, right? What is the difference between you and Messi? Now listen, he can control ball like a god, right? He can not that ball, he can control football like a god, right? That means what? That means if you are talking about control and all these things with respect to muscle, it is known by the name of muscle tone. Okay, muscle tone. He has an excellent muscle tone. Okay, that means cerebellum controls muscle tone, and actually what Messi has done is Messi has actually mastered this muscle tone using his cerebellum. Clear? Using his cerebellum. Clear? That means skilled voluntary movement. Now listen with all your attention. What actually cerebellum does is it actually helps in skilled voluntary movement. Okay, skilled voluntary movements. Okay. Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. The skill voluntary movement actually increases when you increase your muscle tone. That's it. When you increase your muscle tone, your skilled voluntary movement increases. Okay? Clear? Clear? Now, my third question was, if I tell you right now to move your head to the right or left, I just told reverse, okay? Intentionally, I will tell you about that later. Vestibulocular reflex, don't worry about eyes and all, okay? If I tell you to move your head towards the right side, then what will be your response? You will move it to the right side. How do you know that this is the right side, this is the left side, right? Now listen with all your attention possible. That means you know the position of your head as well, right? Position of head and neck is also controlled by cerebellum. Position of your head and neck is also controlled by cerebellum. Clear? Position of your head and neck is also controlled by your cerebellum. Clear? Okay. This is actually done by vestibular apparatus. That means cerebellum has a very intimate connection with vestibular system. Clear? Okay. So we will learn about cerebellum step by step today. Why? Because cerebellum is a huge chapter. Okay, cerebellum is a huge chapter and it has got many layers. Okay, it's like a layered film. Okay, it has got many layers. So we will be talking about each one of them and their position and all these things. What is the importance of cerebellum in these things, in these functions. Now, at first we will be talking about the anatomy of cerebellum. Clear? Now listen with all your attention. We will be at first talking about anatomy of cerebellum. Okay. Now, listen. We will be first talking about anatomy of cerebellum. Clear? Now, when I am talking about anatomy of cerebellum, you must understand that this anatomy of cerebellum is not a single topic. It contains in itself 4 other topics. That means the anatomy of cerebellum has been subdivided into 4 categories. Okay? Has been subdivided into 4 categories. That means we will discuss this heading, that is anatomy of cerebellum, under 4 main headings. Under 4 main headings, we will discuss this anatomy of cerebellum. Clear? Clear? Now, a very important point you need to understand here is this. A very, very important point you need to understand here is this, that the first thing we will be discussing about the anatomy of cerebellum is lobes, the lobes of cerebellum. Now a very important point you need to understand here is this, sometimes back people thought that cerebellum is actually small brain. Within the brain it's a small brain. That's why it is known as cerebellum. Cerebellum means smaller brain. But today scientists know that cerebellum contains more amount of neurons than the cerebrum itself. Okay? And its intrinsic circuitry is really, really tough. We'll talk about that molecular architecture and intrinsic circuitry today, don't worry. Clear? We'll try to, combat these tough things with our own intellectually active cerebrum. Okay? Now, so we will be reading about, reading and learning about cerebellum using our cerebrum. So it's a very important thing because we are using our less fortunate brain, which contains less amount of neurons. Okay. Now listen. So cerebellum actually is very interesting when you talk about its anatomy. Why? There are many layers of anatomical, characteristics in the cerebellum itself. Clear? Now, what we will do is, when I will be discussing this anatomy, or when I will be discussing, lobes or something like that, okay, then you must understand that I will try to, describe the structure in the board. Then I will be showing you an image. Then in the image itself, I will be showing how we are doing these things and how these sections are done. Okay, clear? Now, for those who are actually watching this video right now, you don't have this thing, I know, that is you can't attend the class, but you have one thing, that is whenever I will discuss something on the board with respect to anatomy only, not the physiology part and the architecture part, only with respect to anatomy, you need to see the real pictures, right? What I will do is actually, when I will be drawing something and I will be explaining it, then after some times I will be showing a picture and which will appear on your screen. Clear? Then you pause that and you try to educate yourself using that picture, okay, when my explanation is over. Clear? Okay, so let's start with this understanding. Clear? Now, a very important part you need to understand is this, that we will be discussing anatomy of cerebellum, but before we start the anatomy of cerebellum, we must understand two things. That is, with respect to anatomy of cerebellum, we need to know two things. Okay? Now listen with all your attention possible. Actually, cerebellum sits in the posterior cranial fossa. What is posterior cranial fossa? Suppose this is your skull. Okay? Suppose this is your skull. Now, listen with all your attention possible. These are your, Now, listen with all your attention. If you cut this part, that is, if you have a transverse section of the skull, and if you remove this top part, then it will look like a cavity, right? It will look like this, right? It will look like a cavity. Now, if I draw this cavity, that means, suppose this is your skull, okay? Okay, now, okay, suppose this is the lower part of the skull, suppose this is this, and this is the upper part of the skull, and I have removed this upper part, and this is left out. This portion is now left out, right? This portion, and I will be showing you this portion like this. Okay, I will be showing you like this. That means this is your, top portion of this is the top view of this particular, section. Now listen, this is your posterior cranial fossa. This is your, foramen magnum, right? This is your posterior cranial fossa. Now, in this space sits the cerebellum, or specifically in this space, the posterior part of the cerebellum sits. Okay, the posterior, lobe of the cerebellum sits. We'll talk about what is posterior lobe and what is anterior lobe. Don't worry. Now, listen, this is called posterior cranial fossa, okay? This is called posterior cranial fossa or fossa, whatever it is, okay? Posterior cranial fossa, okay? Now, to this posterior cranial fossa, the posterior lobe of cerebellum sits, okay? That means if you try to fit the posterior lobe here, suppose this is your suppose this is your posterior lobe, okay? This is anterior cranial fossa, this is posterior cranial fossa. Now if you try to fit the posterior cranial fossa here, suppose this is your cerebellum, and if you try to fit this posterior cranial fossa here, that means the posterior part is going like this, it is fitting here, and the anterior part is going like this, okay? That means suppose this is my cerebellum, the anterior part is going like this, and this is my cerebellum, the posterior part is going like this and sitting here, and the anterior part is sitting like this, okay? Clear? Now, okay? Okay? Now, a very important point here you need to understand is this. So, the cerebellum is situated in the posterior cranial fossa. Okay? And a very important point here, the second point is very important for you people to understand, that is the cerebellum actually lies over the fourth ventricle. The cerebellum actually lies over the fourth ventricle, okay? It lies over the fourth ventricle. Clear? Now, what is that? I will talk about that later when I will be talking about the vermal and paravermal area, okay? Now, suppose this is your vermis, we will talk about that later, what is vermis. Suppose this is your vermis, and this is your, suppose this is your, midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata, and suppose this is your vermis, here lies the fourth ventricle. That means, if you think like this, that this is the fourth ventricle, then actually the cerebellum sits over the fourth ventricle. Clear? And in the rostral section also you can see the fourth ventricle, okay? In the rostral section what we see is actually what? We see the cerebellar nuclei, okay? We'll talk about that later, don't worry. These are very interesting topics. Now we'll be discussing the anatomy of cerebellum, and we'll discuss anatomy of cerebellum into 4 different types of discussion. That is, first is lobes, that is anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Now listen with all your attention. A very interesting twist here is this: the lobes of cerebellum has been actually divided into 2 categories. One is only a pure anatomical category. Clear? One is a pure anatomical category, anatomical lobe. Another is a functional category. Now listen with all your attention. This is a purely anatomical figure, okay? Now listen with all your attention. When you are talking about the anatomy of cerebellum, you must understand that you first talk about what? Lobes. But the lobes of cerebellum are divided into 2 categories, that is the anatomical lobes and the functional lobes, right? Now a very important part is this, that when you are talking about the anatomical lobe, we will try to show you the pictures, okay? Now, but how to tackle these anatomical lobes right now using this board? Why it is important for you to understand, because you will have to write in exams, and in exam you will get a paper which is 2D, and these anatomical lobes, whatever be it, whether it is cerebellum, these are all 3D things. That's why it will be impossible for you to understand how to draw these structures if you just keep on learning this with respect to 3D diagram. Okay? Now, so we will be starting with anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Okay? Anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Okay, we will be starting with anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Now a very important point here you need to understand right now is this, that whenever you are talking about the anatomical lobe, you must understand how cerebellum actually sits on the brainstem. What is brainstem? Medulla, pons and midbrain, medulla and pons. That is midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata, right? That is, this is your this is your brainstem, okay? Actually your brainstem looks more naturally like this, okay? For the time being you understand this is your brainstem. Why it is called brainstem? Why it is called brainstem? Because this is actually the portion of the brain which holds the cerebrum and cerebellum together. Clear? That means cerebellum and cerebellum are like branches of trees. Okay, but the main stem or the main trunk of the tree is this stem, brainstem. Now brainstem consists of what? Brainstem consists of, and here is your spinal cord. Okay, here is your spinal cord. Now listen with all your attention. Brainstem actually comprises of midbrain, this is pons, and this is medulla oblongata. Now take my word for it, cerebellum has connections with all these three as well as with cerebrum. Cerebellum has connections with all these three and cerebrum. Now listen with all your attention. Now we are going to discuss the anatomical positioning of or anatomical structures associated with cerebellum, anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Now listen with all your attention. Suppose this is my hand, okay, and suppose this is this is this palm of my hand is actually midbrain, then it is okay, let me draw like this. Suppose this is okay, this demarcation of my watch is actually, this is actually the end of midbrain. This demarcation is actually what, this is pons and this is what, medulla, right? Now a very important point you need to understand is this, that cerebellum, suppose this is my cerebellum, cerebellum will attach like a peculiar thing, that is, suppose, this is my cerebellum, okay, why I am taking it upside down you will understand later. Now suppose this is my cerebellum, okay, suppose this is my cerebellum, cerebellum will actually join this area like this, they will fold inwards, this portion will fold inwards, they will fold inwards and they will join here. Clear? This portion will fold and they will join here. That means when you are trying to understand the anatomy of cerebellum, the first thing you need to do is, whenever you are trying to take out the cerebellum, you will have two difficulties. That is, if you have taken out the cerebellum, then you will be getting something like this, right? Now if you stretch this area, you will get more and more difficult things here. That means many things of cerebellum are hidden from our view of this aspect of cerebellum. That means whenever you are trying to look at cerebellum from this aspect, suppose this is my midbrain, this is pons and this is medulla oblongata, okay. Now you are trying to see this, suppose this is my cerebellum. Now if you are trying to see the cerebellum, then you will see that actually what you will see is a very very important thing. So now listen with all your attention. What you are seeing is now listen. So you have taken out this cerebellum, right? Now what you are seeing is this portion and this portion. Okay, now listen with all your attention possible. If you take out your cerebellum, you will see two lobes then and there. If you take out the cerebellum, you will see two lobes then and there. Now listen with all your attention. Two lobes then and there. That is what? Now listen with all your attention possible. This portion of cerebellum is called anterior lobe. This is called anterior lobe. Okay, this is called anterior lobe. Okay, now listen with all your attention possible. This portion, this whole thing, apart from the anterior lobe, this portion apart from the anterior lobe is called posterior lobe. Okay, this is called posterior lobe. Okay, now this is called posterior lobe. Now a very important point you need to understand is this: if I tell you right now that anatomical lobes of cerebellum, there are how many anatomical lobes of cerebellum available? Now if you try to answer this question, I will have to rub this. Now listen, if I ask you how many anatomical lobes of cerebellum are available, or how many anatomical lobes are present in cerebellum, then the answer will be anterior lobe, you know, right? Anterior lobes, and then posterior lobes, that you also know. Now you can draw that even, right? In a 2D space you can draw that even, but if I tell you right now that there is another lobe which you cannot see, when you take out this particular portion or take out, you know, cerebellum from the brainstem, then what is that particular lobe called? That particular lobe is called flocculonodular lobe. Now a very important point you need to understand here, it is very important. Now listen, flocculonodular lobe is actually present. Now listen, suppose, now let me use my pen. Okay, now I guess you can see, don't do this at home. Okay, now I guess you can see this is the marking. Now listen, this is suppose your, you know, suppose this is your what? This is your anterior lobe, this is your posterior lobe. Now if you stretch this part, which was, you know, which was inside this like that, now if you stretch this part, this is another lobe called flocculonodular lobe. This is another lobe called flocculonodular lobe. Now you understand this flocculonodular lobe is very, very important. Why? Because this flocculonodular lobe is one of the most ancient, you know, portion of your cerebellum. Even fishes have it. Even fishes or class species have it. Clear? I hope you have read your animal kingdom classes, or you know what is animal kingdom, you know, looks like. Okay. Now, so flocculonodular lobe is actually absent when you first see your, you know, what? Your cerebellum. Now listen with all your attention. Now how can we distinguish between anterior lobe and posterior lobe? That means what I am asking is, what is the name of this structure which differentiates? What is the name of this structure which differentiates anterior lobe from the posterior lobe, right? This is called primary fissure. This is called actually primary fissure. Primary fissure. Okay, this is called primary fissure. Okay, now listen, you know what is a fissure? It's a deep down, you know, into the tissue of any, you know, surface. Oh, sorry, it is a deep down surface into a tissue. That means suppose you know, this is your scalpel. Okay, now suppose this is your anterior lobe, this is posterior lobe. Now you will understand, suppose this is your anterior lobe, you know, I have skin foldings, right? Cerebellum also have some foldings which are generally which are generally just surface foldings, not the fissure ones. That means they don't have any, deeper connections. They are just, surface foldings on the cerebellum, okay? These are called folia. Clear? This is called folia. Now, these folias are present everywhere. The surface markings are present everywhere. Now, how to distinguish between a folia and primary fissure? Take your scalpel and just insert in every folia. You will understand the folia are not deep enough, but they are shallow markings. But if you find out your primary fissure and if you try to dig in, you will understand that it is going deep. It will go deep. That means it's a fissure. Okay. Now, how to distinguish between a surface marking and a fissure is very important. Look at your palm. Look at your palm. These are your surface markings, right? It's not for astrological purposes. Okay. These are your surface marking, but this is your fissure. It will go deep, right? Clear? Okay. Now listen with all your attention. So folias are the surface markings or general depressions and elevations present on the surface of cerebellum, but fissures are going deep inside cerebellum. Okay. Now, if you really want to know more about this folia and the difference between folia and primary fissure and how anterior lobe looks like and how posterior lobe looks like, then I will be showing now a photograph. Okay, a photo. Clear? Now, for those who don't have that way of connecting, then you pause the video right now. You will see the photo in your screen now. Pause the video and try to assimilate what I have just said. Okay. So you have seen the difference between anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and how primary fissure differentiates them, and what are folias you have seen, right? What are folias you have just now seen, right? Now, the important point you need to understand is this, that now we will be discussing about flocculonodular lobe. Okay, now we will be discussing about flocculonodular lobes. Now, a very important point right now you need to understand is this: if you want to discuss flocculonodular lobe, you must understand flocculonodular lobe actually is made up of two things, flocculus and nodule. That's why it is flocculonodular lobe. That means flocculonodular lobe is made up of two things, flocculus and nodule. Now listen with all your attention. As they merge, that's why their name comes, that's why their name appears to be as flocculonodular lobe. Clear? Now, a very important point here is this, that you need to understand a very basic thing, that is, suppose you have seen this portion, right? Okay, I am always drawing with this thing. Now, if I am rubbing this, that doesn't mean that anterior lobe is not present here. Now, what is this portion? Why I have drawn this thing? Why I have drawn a demarcation here? Okay. Now, this is nothing but vermis, vermal area. This is vermis. Okay. This is vermis. Now, this is vermis. Now, for those who are attending the classes, I will be showing the picture now. For those who are not that much fortunate, I will be telling you, not that much fortunate, that is a wrong word, but not that much, into this, that you will attend classes, but you will attend good online lectures like edlixirs. Now, a diagram, will be coming here. Okay, a diagram will be coming here, and you try to identify which is the vermal area. Okay, right now, try to identify which is the vermal area. You have identified, I guess, that this is the vermal area, right? This is the vermal area. Clear? That means you now know that how a vermis or how a vermal area looks like in an anatomical dissection, right? Now, so in the board, this is suppose your vermis. Okay. Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. Okay. Now, the very, very important point is this, that this is your, this is what? This is your anterior lobe, this is your posterior lobe, this is flocculonodular lobe, but listen with all your attention. Your cerebellum, suppose this is your, brainstem. Your cerebellum actually sits like this. Your cerebellum sits like this. That means what I am saying is this. If you see it from, suppose this is my cerebellum, and it is attached like this. Okay. Now if you, okay, I am confusing you a lot. But suppose this is your brainstem, and cerebellum actually sits like this. This is your, suppose for this my thumb, is the what? Is the flocculonodular lobe. The cerebellum fits like this. Now it fits actually like this. That means this is this surface where there is anterior lobe and posterior lobe, where you can only see the anterior lobe and posterior lobe. This surface is called the superior surface. So this is the superior surface of cerebellum. Now important point you need to understand is this. Now if you are an anatomist and you have cut the, or you have severed the connections of cerebellum from midbrain and pons and medulla oblongata, then you will understand that if you have severed, then you have got a portion like this. Okay, you have got a portion like this, anterior lobe, posterior lobe, this is superior surface. Now if you turn back, then you will see these grooves and all, right? You will see these grooves and all. Now I will be trying to draw these grooves. Okay, clear? Now I will be trying to draw these grooves. Now listen, this is what? This is what? Now listen, now this is actually the, this is actually the surface which is actually getting attached to this, suppose this is your, pons, medulla oblongata, spinal cord. Okay. Now this cerebellum is getting attached with brainstem with the help of this surface, not this surface. Clear? But if I cancel these, things, now listen with all your attention. That means this is the surface of the cerebellum which is getting attached with the brainstem, right? Which is getting attached with the brainstem. Now a very important point here you need to understand right now is this, that this brainstem reveals many important structures. One of the most important structure is flocculonodular lobe. Okay. This is your flocculonodular lobe. These are your flocculus. Clear? These are your flocculus. Okay. And this is your nodule. Okay. I was not checking the nodule part. I was checking something else. Now listen, when to tell you about these things. These things. These are tonsils, cerebellar tonsils. Very important. Clear? We will be talking about that. Now listen, because many pathological conditions are, associated with this thing. Now listen. So this is flocculus. Okay. This is flocculus and this is nodule. Now a very important point you need to understand is this, that what is this area? This is nothing but vermis. Clear? You know that. Okay. Now a very, very important part is this, that this is attached with what? Brainstem. Now cerebellum gets attached to the brainstem by the help of three structures which are called cerebellar peduncles. Clear? Brainstem gets attached, cerebellum gets attached to the brainstem by the help of cerebellar peduncles. Clear? Cerebellar peduncles. Clear? That means, now important point you need to understand, that means the, you know, the anterior surface of the cerebellum, the anterior surface of the cerebellum, this is the superior surface and this is the anterior surface. Okay? Now this is not the posterior, this is not the, you know, this is anterior, that means this will be posterior. No, this is superior surface, this is the anterior surface. Now listen, this is your anterior surface and this is your superior surface and this is your anterior surface. Now anterior surface contains 3 cerebellar peduncles. Now listen with all your attention. Suppose this is your, you know, brainstem. Now suppose this is your cerebellum. Now cerebellum has 3 cerebellar peduncles. Okay, 3 cerebellar peduncles. This is inferior cerebellar peduncle, this is middle cerebellar peduncle, and this is superior cerebellar peduncle. Now listen with all your attention. If you sever these connections, what will happen is these, you know, cerebellar peduncles will be present here as well. That means these cerebellar peduncles will be present in the anterior surface as well as on the brainstem. Clear? Now listen with all your attention. I will have to, you know, remove this part. I will draw that later. Now listen. Now listen with all your attention. Suppose this is your, you know, brainstem. This is suppose, you know, your brainstem. This is a brainstem. Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. Okay? These areas have superior cerebellar peduncles, these have medial cerebellar peduncles, and these have what? Inferior cerebellar peduncles. Okay? Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. Clear? That means these are your what? Superior cerebellar peduncles. Now suppose this is your superior cerebellar peduncles, medial cerebellar peduncles, and inferior cerebellar peduncles. Okay? Now listen, why these cerebellar peduncles are important? Because they are the, you know, routes of entry and exit of neurons or entry and exit of nerves. Clear? That means via these, you know, peduncles, nerves enter the what? Nerves enter the cerebellum. Nerves enter the cerebellum. Okay? Nerves enter the cerebellum and leaves the cerebellum as well. Clear? Okay, just for understanding, you must understand that superior, middle and inferior cerebellar peduncles are important for entry of, you know, nerves or neurons, but there is no exit route of neurons when it comes to, you know, middle cerebellar peduncle. That means through middle cerebellar peduncles, no nerves comes out. Clear? No nerves or no neurons comes out. Clear? Okay. Now, a very important point you need to understand here is this, that what I was talking about is this. What is this? What is this region? This is called cerebellar tonsils. Cerebellar tonsils. Now listen, when there is a rise in intracranial pressure, then what happens is these cerebellar tonsils touches, or this cerebellar peduncles, you know, compromises with the medulla oblongata. The cerebral peduncles actually, you know, touches the medulla oblongata, and this cerebral peduncle touches that area of the medulla oblongata which is associated with our respiratory, you know, rhythm. That's why when intracranial pressure increases, when does intracranial pressure increases? Intracranial pressure increases due to mainly two reasons: accidents accidents, that is due to hemorrhage, intracranial pressure increases, or during burst of tumors, or during tumors, intracranial pressure increases and the cerebellar tonsils actually touches that area of the medulla oblongata which is associated with our basic, basic, electrical rhythm of, basic, respiratory rhythm, okay. That's why whenever intracranial pressure increases, cerebral tonsils touches the area of the medulla oblongata which is associated with our respiratory rhythm, and due to which respiration stops, and that's why death occurs in patients having increased intracranial pressure. Clear? Okay. Now, we have up till now discussed only the anatomical lobes of cerebellum. Now we will be talking about the functional lobes of cerebellum. Clear? Now we will be talking about the functional lobes of cerebellum. But before we go to that particular section, I will be showing you the picture again, and you will be telling me what are those. I will be pointing out here and there, and you will have to tell me what are those. Now listen, for those who are watching this video, I will be putting the same picture, okay. Then you try to guess the answer, or you try to tell the correct answer, and you can actually check those answers with the previous picture, okay. Okay, I will be showing both the anterior as well as superior surfaces, okay. Now we will be talking about the functional lobes of cerebellum. Now we will be talking about the functional lobes of cerebellum, okay. Now we will be talking about the functional lobes of cerebellum. Now, a very important point here is this: whenever we are trying to talk about functional lobes of cerebellum, the first thing you need to understand is this, that functional lobes of cerebellum, like the anatomical lobes, have three main structures. The first one is the most primitive, that is vestibulocerebellum. Now listen, this is the most primitive structure present in the cerebellum, and this is, to prove this point, I can say that this structure, that is vestibulocerebellum, is present even in class species or fishes. It is present in class species also. Now, vestibulocerebellum, that's why is known as Archicerebellum. You know from where this archi words come from? Archibacteria, Archaeopteryx. That means archi means primitive. Clear? Archicerebellum. Okay. Now, what is vestibulocerebellum? Nothing but flocculonodular lobe. Clear? Is nothing but flocculonodular lobe. Okay. Anatomically, vestibulocerebellum is nothing but flocculonodular lobe. Okay. Now we'll be talking about another portion, that is Spinocerebellum. Spinocerebellum. Now to talk about Spinocerebellum, you must understand that it is the second oldest portion of the cerebellum. It is the oldest portion. It is the oldest portion, right? And this is the second oldest. Okay? It is the second oldest portion. Now, Spinocerebellum has something very important, that is, it is also known by, Paleolithic age and all. It is also, that's why, known by the name of Paleocerebellum. Paleocerebellum, okay? Paleocerebellum, okay? Now, the newest addition to the cerebellum structure is, so cerebellar structure is known by the name of Cerebrocerebellum, okay? Clear? Cerebrocerebellum, okay? Now, Cerebrocerebellum, as this is the newest addition to the cerebellar structures, that's why known by the name of Neocerebellum. Okay? Now we will be drawing, we will rubbing this board, okay? Copy this first, because we will be rubbing this board, and then we will be taking out the cerebellum from the brainstem, and we will be showing you which portion is called Spinocerebellum, which portion is called Cerebrocerebellum, and which portion is called Paleocerebellum, okay? Now, okay, now, so this is your, cerebellar structures. This is your anterior lobe. This is your posterior lobe. This is your vermis, right? This is your vermis. These are your paravermal areas. Okay, now listen with all your attention possible. Clear? This is your flocculonodular lobe. This is vestibulocerebellum, right? This is vestibulocerebellum. Now, which one is called Spinocerebellum? Which one is called Spinocerebellum? This is your Spinocerebellum. This is Spinocerebellum. Okay? This is your Spinocerebellum. And this one, this area is called Cerebrocerebellum. We'll talk about this in details when we'll talking about the tracts which are going out in and out of the cerebellum. We will then be talking about Cerebrocerebellum, Spinocerebellum, and Vestibulocerebellum in details and what are their connections. Okay? Clear? Okay, so we have successfully discussed the lobes of cerebellum. Now we will be talking about another aspect of anatomy of cerebellum, that is cerebellar cortex structure. Okay, we will be talking about cerebellar cortex structure, that is, we have divided our anatomy into 4, that is, parts. That is, number 1 was lobe, and then it is what? Then it is cerebellar or cortex. Okay, structure of cerebellar cortex. Now, if you want to learn the details of cerebellar cortex, you must understand this, that what is homunculus? You must understand a word called homunculus. You know what is the meaning of this Latin word? The meaning of this Latin word is little human or little man. Clear? Little man. Now, why I am telling this? Because I am going to draw a homunculus here. Right now I am going to draw a homunculus here. Okay. Suppose now, if you think that this is funny, then I must say that you must concentrate on this part. Now listen with all your attention. A very important point here you need to understand is this, that this is homunculus. Now what it is showing is, now this is vermis, this portion is your vermis. Now what this homunculus is showing is this trunk region is always controlled by this vermis. This trunk region is always controlled by this vermis, and our extremities, hands and legs, okay, and our extremities are always controlled by paravermal area. This is paravermal area, this is vermal area. Clear? As it is running with the vermis, that's why it is paravermal area, parallel to vermal area. That's why paravermal area. Now listen, our extremities are controlled by paravermal area. Now listen with all your attention. Now, if I draw like this, what do you think? Now listen, the lower portion of the vermis, which is actually present in the posterior lobe, this lower portion of the vermis actually has this type of homunculus. That means the back muscles of your body is controlled by this area, okay, and this type of movement is actually controlled by this area in this fashion. That means again the extremities are controlled by the paravermal area, but the core body portion is controlled by your cerebellum or vermal area, controlled by your vermal area. Clear? So this is the homunculus of this particular thing. So this is cerebellar cortex. This is the functional aspect of cerebellar cortex. Now we will be discussing, we will just be touching cerebellar peduncles. Clear? Now we already know that there are inferior cerebellar peduncles, there are medial cerebellar peduncles, and there are superior cerebellar peduncles. Keep that in mind. After that, we will understand this when we will be talking about the functionalities of these cerebellar peduncles. Okay. Now, the fourth thing is very important, which is cerebellar deep nuclei. Okay. The fourth thing is very important, that is cerebellar deep nuclei. Cerebellar nuclei. Now, cerebellar nuclei is also part of anatomical, characteristics of cerebellum. Okay. Now, whenever we are talking about cerebellar nuclei, you must understand how can we see those cerebellar nuclei. Okay. Now, listen with all your attention. Suppose this is the anterior aspect of your cerebellum. Okay. This is the pons. This is your medulla oblongata. And then of course this is your spinal cord. Okay. This is your midbrain. Okay. This is your midbrain. Now listen. Now suppose this is your cerebellar hemisphere. Okay. Now this is your cerebellar hemisphere. Now listen with all your attention possible. Now our cerebrum has two hemispheres, right? Cerebrum has two hemispheres, right? And they are connected by two cerebrum hemispheres, or two cerebral hemispheres are connected by corpus callosum, right? There is 2C, and between these 2C there is double C, right? Two cerebrum are connected by corpus callosum, right? Now what is corpus callosum? We have already discussed that corpus callosum is nothing but a band of nerve fibers. Okay. Now it's a band of nerve fibers, but that means using corpus callosum, information go from here to here and that. That means in the corpus callosum you will only find axons of different neurons, but two cerebellar hemispheres are connected by two cerebellar hemispheres. Two cerebellar hemispheres are connected by vermis. Now listen with all your attention possible on this earth. Vermis is not equivalent to corpus callosum, because two cerebral hemispheres are connected by corpus callosum. but vermis connects two cerebellar hemispheres, but it doesn't mean that vermis is the equivalent of corpus callosum. Why? Because vermis has important neuronal cell bodies which controls our truncal movements. We have already seen using homunculus, right? Using homunculus, we have already seen that vermis has several what? Several, you know, neurons and their cell bodies which controls our truncal movements, right? Now, a very important point you need to understand here is this, that vermis is actually the connector of, you know, two cerebellar hemispheres. That is true. That means in this diagram, if I am telling you that suppose this is your right hemisphere and this is your left hemisphere, you must understand that then vermis is present here. Okay, suppose this is your, you know, right hemisphere, this is your left hemisphere, and here is your vermis. You know what do you mean by vermis? You know what is the meaning of the term vermis? Vermis means worm. Now, why it is called a worm? Okay, you will understand. Because it looks like a worm, you know. It looks like this. Okay? You know planaria? It looks like planaria or worm-like thing. That's why it is known as vermis, or vermis in Latin means worm. Clear? Clear? Okay. Now, a very important point you need to understand here is this, that whenever we are talking about cerebellar hemispheres, the first point we need to understand is that the connector of cerebellar hemisphere is vermis. Okay? Now, here is an important point. Suppose if you take this cerebellar hemisphere out of this, you know, brainstem. Now I am taking out the cerebellar hemispheres together with vermis out of the brainstem. Then what we will see is, this. Okay, this is your vermal area. Okay, now a very important point you need to understand here is this, that if you want to, you know, cut this section, that means suppose this is your, you know, back area of cerebellum, and suppose this is your frontal area. Okay. Now, a very important point you need to understand is this. These are, you know, cerebellar peduncles. You will not be cerebellar peduncles in this particular, you know, diagram. But now a very important point you need to understand here is this, that what is the anterior aspect and what is the posterior aspect of cerebellum. Now, I will be showing you actually a simple figure of the posterior aspect and the anterior aspect. And those of you watching the videos, if you know, image will now appear in your screen, you can see that what I was talking about with respect to these diagrams. Okay. Now, a very important point you need to understand is that the figures which you have already seen, you must understand that you will have to cut this section. You will have to cut this area. In this area, you will have to cut in this area, you will have to make a cross section in this area, so that you can see the cerebellar nuclei. Now, a very important point you need to understand is this, whenever you are making sections, okay, in anatomy you use a knife known as Vercoe's brain knife. Okay, Vercoe's brain knife. Using this knife, you can actually cut this section. What is the importance of this knife? Or what is the speciality of this knife? It has double edges. Clear? It has got double edges. I will be showing right now the picture of Vercoe's, you know, brain knife. For those of you watching the videos online, an image will appear right now in front of you. Okay, this is your Vercoe's, you know, brain knife. So you have seen what is Vercoe's brain knife, right? Now, the most important point you should notice is Vercoe's brain knife has two edges. Okay. Now, if you cut this section, if you cut this part of the, you know, hemisphere, cerebellar hemisphere, hemispheres using Verco's, brain knife, you will be seeing this structure. You will be seeing this structure, that is okay. Now very important point, what is this area? This is your vermal area, right? Now a very important point you need to understand is this: if you really want to learn, or if you really want to memorize at least what are the cerebellar nuclei, just remember this mnemonic: don't eat greasy food. That's it. Why? Because the first alphabet of this particular mnemonic actually resembles, or actually will help you remember, the cerebellar nuclei. That is, don't, the D is for dentate nucleus, not dentate gyrus, okay? Dentate nucleus, okay? E for emboliform, okay? G for globose. Now this F stands for fastigial, okay? Fastigial nuclei, okay? So dentate nuclei, emboliform nuclei, globose and fastigial. Now how to draw these? Now dentate nuclei actually looks like tooth. They have a tooth-like appearance. They have a, that's why they are known as dentate. Then after that there is emboliform, okay? This is emboliform. Then after that we have got globose, okay? Then after that we have got fastigial, okay? We have got fastigial. Clear? So dentate, emboliform, globose and fastigial. These are your different, cerebellar nuclei. Now very important point we need to understand here is this, that now we will be talking about different tracts which enters and exit vestibulocerebelli, spinocerebellum and cerebrocerebellum. Clear? Okay. So now we will be talking about the tracts. Okay. Now first we will be talking about the most primitive of them, that is vestibulocerebellum. First we will be talking about the circuitry of vestibulocerebellum. Clear? Now vestibulocerebellum is also known by the name of Archicerebellum because it is the most ancient. That's why we are talking about that first. Why? Because this is because of the fact that it is most easy. Okay. Clear? Okay. Now we will be talking about vestibulocerebellum. Now listen. Circuit of vestibulocerebellum. That means how vestibulocerebellum works. Now important point you need to understand first is this: what is the achievement or what is the aim of this particular vestibulocerebellum? Now the most important thing you need to understand is this: the two things vestibulocerebellum achieves is axial stability. What do you mean by axial stability? It is your body's ability to challenge the gravity. It is your body's ability to challenge the gravity so that you don't fall towards the gravity. That is axial stability. Okay, and it also helps in our balance. Okay, that means whenever we are talking about vestibulocerebellum, then you must understand their function as well. That is, they help in axial stability and balance. Okay. Now a very important point here is this, that how this circuit works. Now listen with all your attention. I will be drawing two aspects of this circuit. I will be presenting here two aspects of circuit. Now listen. After I have finished drawing here, okay, I will try to show a picture of that. Okay. Then from that you also learn. Now listen with all your attention. Suppose this is what? This is your cerebellum. right? This is your cerebellum. Now, this is what? Vestibulocerebellum, flocculus and nodule, right? Which is nodule? This one is nodule, these are flocculus. Now, a very important point you need to understand is this. This is your anterior lobe, you know. This is, fissure. Now, listen with all your attention. What you will have to learn here is this, that suppose this is your, suppose this is your brainstem. This is your brainstem. Now, a very important point here is this: if this is your brainstem, this is midbrain, right? This is midbrain, this is pons, this is medulla oblongata, right? This is your midbrain, then pons, then medulla oblongata. Now, a very important point you need to understand is this: between these structures, the pons and medulla, there is a fine structure known by the name of reticular formation. Okay, we have a separate video on reticular formation. Okay, don't worry about that. So, this is your reticular formation, right? This is your reticular formation. Now, reticular formation is actually not a nuclei, is not a special area. Okay, it's actually a combination of many neurons. Okay, crossing here and there. That's why they are known as reticular formation. Reticulum means what? Nerve knot or knots. That's why it is called reticular formation. Now, a very important point here you need to understand is this, that in the pontine area, in the pons, there is a nucleus. There is a nucleus called vestibular nuclei. Okay, this is vestibular nuclei. Now, listen with all your attention. Vestibular nuclei gets their input. Vestibular nuclei gets their input from vestibular apparatus. Okay, and also vestibular ocular reflex is a part of vestibular ocular reflex as well. Vestibular nuclei. We will talk about vestibular ocular reflex. Okay, don't worry about that. So, vestibular nuclei actually gets their input first from vestibular apparatus. Now, a very important point here you need to understand is this, that this vestibular apparatus, this vestibular nuclei actually sends neurons to the what? To the vestibulocerebellum. This is your vestibulocerebellum, right? Vestibulocerebellum, right? They will send here. Okay. Now, this is your first circuit. Now, this is a starting point. Now, from here what will happen is, from here we will be drawing neurons like this. Okay, this is your this is dendrites, these are dendrites, dendrons, and this is cell body, this is axon, and this is your terminal branch. Okay, now listen. So, from there fastigial nucleus will be from there impulses will flow to the fastigial nucleus of cerebellum. Okay, now listen with all your attention possible. From fastigial nucleus, a very important thing will happen. Now, this is your step 2. From fastigial nucleus, a very important thing will happen, that is, from fastigial nucleus, impulses via many neurons will flow towards, the vestibular nuclei. This is the third step. Impulses will flow towards the vestibular nuclei. Now, a very important point you need to understand here is this, that from fastigial nucleus, impulses will flow also towards the spinal cord. Clear? Towards the spinal cord. That means what is happening here? Now listen with all your attention. When vestibular nucleus is activated by the help of vestibular apparatus, then what happens is this: volley of action potentials are traveling via this first pathway, that is which affects the vestibulocerebellum. Okay. Now from this vestibulocerebellum, again a neuron ascends and activates fastigial nucleus of cerebellum. Now from fastigial nucleus two pathways are coming down. From fastigial nucleus two pathways are coming down, which is number one is which is actually activating the vestibular nuclei itself, and from vestibular nuclei what will happen is this. Okay, I made a mistake. Sorry, I made a mistake. Now let me draw this thing first. Now from vestibular nuclei what will happen is this: a tract will now come down, which is called vestibulospinal tract. You know how these tracts are named? Now listen, from where it is originating, this particular pathway which is coming down, from where it is originating, vestibular nuclei, and from where it is going, spinal cord. That's why it is vestibulospinal tract. That means the first thing represents the origin, the second name represents the target. Clear? This is vestibulospinal tract. Now listen with all your attention. So what happens is this, that whenever fastigial nucleus fires, vestibular nucleus gets activated, and vestigial spine, and these activations are coming down via vestibulospinal tract. But there is an important point here. That is, the important point here is this, that whenever fastigial nucleus gets activated, they will fire in a two direction. That is, one of the ways activating the vestibular nuclei and vestibulospinal tract will be activated. Another way is this. This is called reticulospinal tract. Okay, what is reticulospinal tract? Now listen with all your attention. Reticulospinal tract, why it is named so? Because reticulospinal tract starts from reticular formation. And that's why, as it is starting from reticular formation, therefore it is called reticulospinal tract. Okay. Now listen with all your attention. Reticulospinal, this is your reticulospinal tract. This is your reticulospinal tract. Okay, this is your reticulospinal tract. Now a very important point here you need to understand is this. That means whenever fastigial nucleus is affected by this pathway, there are two pathways coming down. One is vestibulospinal tract, another is reticulospinal tract. Okay. Now we will be talking about details of these two tracts when we will be talking about other pathways associated with this. Okay. But let us draw a diagram so that we can understand this in a very much lucid manner. Now listen. Suppose this is your vestibular nuclei. Okay. Suppose this is your vestibular nuclei. Now from vestibular nuclei, when vestibular nuclei is getting activated by vestibular apparatus. Okay. Now whenever vestibular nuclei is getting activated, then vestibular nuclei is sending impulses to the what? Vestibulocerebellum. Right? It is sending impulses to the vestibulocerebellum, and from vestibulocerebellum a neuron is affecting fastigial nucleus, and from fastigial nucleus two pathways are coming down. From fastigial nucleus two pathways are coming down. Okay, two pathways are coming down. Clear? Number one is vestibulospinal tract, and number two is This is a reticular formation, right? Number 2 is reticulospinal tract. Clear? So this is the simplest diagram possible for this circuitry of vestibulocerebellum. Okay, we'll talk about these tracts later. Okay, what they do and how they do these things. Okay, clear? Now we will be talking about Spinocerebellum, the second oldest part of cerebellum. Now before I start the spinocerebellar tract, you must remember that what are the neurons or what are the nerves coming out of your muscle spindle. That means you will have to revise one chapter called muscle spindle architecture and also upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons, you must understand. So I am assuming that you have learned all the things about muscle spindle and how they work. Okay, I will be starting the spinocerebellar circuitry. Clear? Now let's talk about spinocerebellar circuitry. Clear?